Good evening once again, and welcome to Ideas at Work and Beyond. What you see on your television screen, if they're small children or really cats and dogs in the room, you may want to set them aside, because that, my friends, was Bobby Hull, a wonderful hockey player for the Chicago Blackhawks. That would have been about circa 1975. And Bobby Hull captures the toughness that is the Chicago Blackhawks. And for those of you that haven't been watching the Stanley Cup Finals, last night the Chicago Blackhawks won their first Stanley Cup in over 49 years. And the toughness represented by that photograph of Bobby Hull was represented in this team, where you had a defenseman named Duncan Keith who got 7 teeth knocked out of his mouth, 7 teeth, and he finished the game. That's toughness. I mean, I hate to say it. I'm sure baseball players are tough too, but they get a little tweak in an elbow, and they have to go for an MRI and then another one, and they'll be back in 6 months. Hockey players, you get stitches, you miss one shift, and you're back on the ice. So this is a shout-out to the Chicago Blackhawks, who have just won the Stanley Cup, universally recognized as the most difficult sports trophy to achieve. It's just a thrill. You might know, I was born and raised in and around Chicago, played youth hockey there, and I love the Chicago Blackhawks. So, a salute to you, Duncan Keith. A salute to you, Chicago, for winning your first Stanley Cup in over 49 years.
How soon before the Cubs win, Marty?
Cubs might be, we really think in terms of centuries for the Cubs. Not so much decades.
2008 was supposed to be.
2008. Well, I'll let you know in the vast viewing audience. What happened with the Cubs is there was a farmer who came into Chicago with his pet goat, and they did not allow the goat into Wrigley Field. And the farmer was not going to go into the game without his pet goat.
Post-1908.
This is post-1908. No, I think it was 1908. Yeah, maybe 1909. I don't know. When did they stop having goats as pets?
They won in 08.
That might...
What can it be for?
I don't know. I'm not sure why. Anyways. Let's not go there. But
Chicago Cubs have yet.
So the Chicago Cubs. So the farmer left with his pet goat and put a curse on our favorite Cubbies, and ever since then they have not won. Much like the curse of the Bambino, but that was overcome. So we can only hope. So now the Chicago Cubs, you're due. But tonight the Chicago Blackhawks. Last night they won. Their captain is a 22-year-old guy. He hoists the Stanley Cup. He's the MVP. It was just a really, really fun night. Another shout out, and we have an incredible guest tonight, so I'm going to move fast, but a shout out to Beth Yanity. Just this evening I came from a reception for Beth. She was being honored by the League of Women Voters. Beth Yanity is the First Lady of Ridgefield. She's a beloved member of the community, and she was being honored tonight at the League of Women Voters.
You better
it's a shout out to Beth Yanity. Now, I realize this is quite a segue from bloody hockey players to Beth Yanity, but stay with me. And then the last thing I want to just preface, if you turn to the front cover of the New York Times, you will find 2 candidates in California. We are talking about Republican women that are taking the electorate by storm. Now, these Republican women happen to have a lot of money, and they're spending it on their campaigns, but you had a Republican woman that won the nomination for her party to run for governor, and another one to run for senator. I think we have that on the cover of the New York Times. Also, a Republican woman won in the primary in Arizona. And, Al, I think you'll find that there's a Republican woman who seems to be the front runner for the U.S. Senate seat as well. Linda McMahon.
There was no primary in Arizona. Marty, there was no primary in Arizona.
Well, there was some sort of
competition.
South Carolina was
2,500 miles away.
I love that
Absolutely, but there was a woman that won in Arizona.
She's a great
woman that won
candidate
in South Carolina, and these are all Republican women, like Linda McMahon.
She's a Republican?
And, she is definitely a Republican. And it's exciting to be a part of the Republican Party right now because, my friends, the Republican Party is on the march. They are coming back, and they are providing what Abraham Lincoln called, and I will quote, "You cannot help the poor by destroying the rich. You cannot strengthen the weak by weakening the strong. You cannot bring about prosperity by discouraging thrift. You cannot lift the wage earner by pulling down the wage payer. You cannot further the brotherhood of man by inciting class hatred. You cannot build character and courage by taking away people's initiative and independence. And you cannot help people permanently by doing for them what they can and should do for themselves. This show has been hijacked because I understand there was a dead caribou that appeared. And by the way, that goes to the opening of Anwar to oil exploration. But that's kind of a tough. That whole dig baby dig thing. It maybe not the time.
Spill.
Yeah, dig baby dig. So
you're going to get an unlikely caller on this show because of what you said a minute ago. Nothing to do with
the goats.
No.
Oh, what?
You called Beth Hannity the first lady of Ridgefield. If Peggy Marconi calls up here later, you said something like that. I don't think she'll appreciate it.
We don't want to start any noise. Peggy Marconi is technically the first lady of
Beth Hannity is what I like to call the grand dame of the Ridgefield Republican Party, for lack of a better term.
Beth Hannity is universally loved in Ridgefield.
And Doc Hannity's presence will always be felt in Ridgefield.
Absolutely as well. He was a wonderful man as well. So, Beth, we salute you. Okay, that was a bit of a hodgepodge. We went from pet goats to bloody hockey players to Beth Hannity to quotes that may have been attributed to Abraham Lincoln. But the purpose of the show tonight is we are so privileged to have Dan DiBasella joining us.
Oh, thank you, Mike.
And by the way, the phone number, if you can put that up, it's hold on, I have it right here in my book.
792.
4101, 792-4101. And for this vast viewing audience, you have an opportunity to speak to the next United States Congressman from the state of Connecticut, Dan DiBasella, who overwhelmingly won the nomination at the Republican convention.
Who called that one?
Matt Grimes definitely called that one, and it was in a burst of Republican big tent party unity. I have to say that I gave the nominating speech for Rob Merkel. Apparently did not. I mean, he went into it with 52 votes, and after my speech, I think he had like 35. So do the math on that. If I had not given the speech, Rob might be doing a lot better. How many votes did you get in that compared to his 35?
We got 77% over 200 votes.
Over 200 votes. So Dan DiBasella is overwhelmingly voted by the party rank and file to be the nominee.
And I will say this.
Fourth congressional.
I will say this. Dan was able to do something that his colleagues in two other districts were not able to do, and that is that, of course, his Senate colleague, Senator Caligiuri, in the 5th district, and then out in the 2nd district, where there's a three-way primary. Dan was the only one in the 3 districts Republicans have targeted, the 2nd, the 4th, and the 5th. Dan was the only one able to stave off a primary, and I think that says a lot. Sam Caligiuri will go through a primary in the 5th district. 2nd district, I think we have a three-way primary. Dan was the only one able to do that, so that says a lot that he's able to move right into the full campaign and face Congressman.
Hold on a second.
Hold the press. Okay. So Matt Grimes, for once in his life, may have it wrong. We'll say hold the press. We'll go to
the signatures are not going to verify, so we cannot waste our time with it. Come on.
By the way, our poor guest is here like a potted plant.
Honestly, you guys are much more interesting than me. So
listen, we'll get to you in a minute. You just sit there, Al.
No, well, actually, it's one of my first questions I wanted to ask you here, is because, it's very, in my opinion, it's very unusual to see Republicans going through primaries. But you said in the 5th, we have a race between, I think, 4 individuals. You got Greenberg, Caligiuri,
3, one dropped out.
Is his last name Bernier?
Bernier, that's right.
Bernier, Caligiuri,
Greenberg. You might be running into a situation where you'll have yourself as the endorsed nominee, Rob Merkel, who I think put in some petitioning candidates, and Tom Herman, I think his name is, if he can just get his 4 signatures straightened out a little bit. So
sounds like Texas politics.
There's a good possibility that you'll be running into a primary. So just right now, just tell us, because it's one thing to get the convention vote, but it's another thing to get the people's vote in August. Why do you feel you're the best person to take the nomination in August and go forward in the general election?
No, thanks, Al. And it remains to be seen whether we're going to have a primary or not. All 3 candidates submitted signatures. Unclear whether there's enough to force one. If there is, I'm very confident that just as 77% of the folks at the convention said, the primary voters will say, we want someone to be the Republican nominee who is a man of ideas. We don't want the Republican Party to be the party of no. We want to be the party of a better way. To say that, what Nancy Nancy Pelosi and Jim Himes has done is not right for Fairfield County, but there are better ideas for the economy, for health care, for the deficit. That's what people are looking for, and I think that's why we won the convention overwhelmingly. Is people said, look, all these guys are good guys, but we need someone who's able to carry the message and the values that we hold dear to the electorate in November.
Right. Well, one of the things I hear from Republicans is this big thing that we want outsiders. We're tired of the insiders. Some people could argue that you being a state senator, that you are somewhat of an insider as opposed to being an outsider. So what would you say about that?
I've been a state senator for 3.5 years, so it's not like I'm Chris Dodd. I've been there for 30 years. I'm a businessman by training. I've worked for McKinsey, for Pepsi, for most recently the Hartford, and politics is something that I got into because I want to give back. Honestly, it started with my hometown. I was on the local board of finance there, and then ran for the state senate in 2006. And I'm running for this not because I want to be a career politician, but because I actually want to try to get something done in Washington, and then come home, and then go back to my business career. And I think that's what we need on both sides of the aisle, are people who are willing to go there, be citizen politicians, and then come back to their real life.
One of the things that Dan was able to do, too, that I think really speaks a lot to his capabilities as a candidate, is he was able to win an open state Senate seat in what was an atrocious year for the Republican Party, and that was 2006. I think that was when they lost the Congress. They lost many seats in the legislature, but that was an open race in a swing district. I think you're 20 seconds a second, a swing district, and you won it. And that I think speaks a lot to his capabilities as a candidate. This is thought to be a good Republican year. This is thought to be a race about ideals, and I think that more than anything else, this speaks to Congressman Himes' credit too, I think they're going to give them a very good, healthy debate in the 4th District. The United States House race comes to the 4th District. That reflects the country. That reflects the mood of it. That's probably the clearest choice that 4th District has had in 35, 40 years, Dan DiBasella and Jim Himes.
Well, that brings up another thing. The 4th District is pretty eclectic, I would say. It's not really moderate, it's not really to the right, it's not really to the left. Let's say, for instance, hypothetically speaking, you have a primary. And typically with primaries, you have to go a little further to your base in order to get that particular vote. What are you going to do in a general election that's going to be different from you versus a possible primary, where probably in the primary you have to go a little more to the right? And what are you going to do to get those independent voters in the general election to come on board with you as opposed to Mr. Himes?
I would actually, Albert, probably disagree with the first part of your question. Is my views are my views, and they're not going to move to the right or to the left depending on if there is a primary or there isn't. I'm someone who's very conservative on fiscal issues. Right? I'm a firm believer that we need to reduce the size of government, cut spending, that we need to believe in the free market and small businesses. But I'm also much more moderate on social issues. So I am pro-choice. I am pro-stem cell research. So you actually say, well, geez, is that more conservative, more liberal? I believe what I believe, and I'm going to bring that to the voters, whether that's in a primary or in the general election.
Okay.
Yeah. Just you might have a better insight to this, primary or not primary. I'm on everyone's email list, so they send out these email blasts, like Rob Merkel sent out an email blast. We've done it. We've collected the signatures. We're going to be on the ballot. The people's voice has been heard, and so forth. But what you're saying is not so fast. I don't know, Matt. Do you have any insight in that? You're saying
what has to happen?
Who's the other kid? Tom Herman.
Tom Herman. That's right. That's right.
Okay. Well, let's
self-funding, but
okay. But what?
The way the
is there going to be a primary or isn't there? And when do we know for sure?
We'll know that about a week from today. I think that they have to turn everything into the Secretary of State. But this is being done across the state of Connecticut. And I really would use the 4th District as an example. I'll use the United States Senate race because you've got Peter Schiff there who has had to collect all these signatures across Connecticut. Basically, all of the petitions are turned into local registrars in the Ridgefield Town Hall, in the Danbury City Hall, in the Brookfield Town Hall, what have you. And each of those registrars has to go through these petitions. They've got to check it against the Republican list, and if they're not on the Republican list, bam, that's an invalidated signature. And then if they are on the signature, they've got to check their address, their date of birth, everything else. It's a rigorous process. I'm good friends with the registrar in Brookfield. He has 15 Peter Schiff petitions to go through in Brookfield. And he said he's lucky, he was there last night, he's lucky to get through 3 or 4 of them if he can in the night. Most of our registrars, too, are people that have full-time jobs during the day. They're there at night.
And what's the threshold? How many signatures do they have to have?
And the fourth,
some formula.
yeah, it's 1988, almost 2,000 signatures.
Okay, 2,000 signatures.
And what we're finding is what Matt just said is exactly what's happening. Like right now, some registrars have, especially in the smaller towns, have completed it. You know, Tom Herman, for instance, is likely not to qualify for a primary. He's had 600 of his 2,500 signatures thrown out already, so he's below the 1988. You know, Merkel and Torres, it remains to be seen. They've had a lot thrown out as well, but there's still a lot of towns that are going through the
like
process.
the Stanford registrar will be probably working every day from now until such and such to verify it. And one of the biggest things that you hear, oh, the handwriting is absolutely awful on these things, and they can't even read what's written.
That's why when you collect signatures, you really want to collect maybe almost double what you need for scenarios like this. And smart candidates know. I don't know how the 4th district is broken up in terms of Republicans, but let's say for Peter Schiff, for instance, he went to Simsbury and hit hard in Simsbury because there's a lot of Republicans in Simsbury. You go to certain areas where there's a lot of Republicans, so you have a better chance of getting valid signatures.
Right.
So, it remains to be seen if he's on or not.
Right.
Schiff's petition drive was a little bit more sophisticated, too. I mean, these were people that had gone door to door in different places with petitions before. They were well paid because obviously he has the personal funds to pay petitioners and such. So, and it was a little, I watched them at the Memorial Day parade locally, watched them do it, and I could tell that they knew what they were doing. In some cases, they even asked in a polite way that people weren't offended if they could just see the driver's license so that they made sure they were getting a valid signature with the date of birth. And it, I mean, I'd be very surprised if Peter Schiff did not qualify. Some of the others, I mean, one of the things you look for in validating petitions, because I did this in Virginia when I was in college, is if you look at the addresses, some addresses in the 4th district, if you literally extrapolated out the address, it's someplace in the Long Island Sound.
Oh, okay. All right, but now, as the I mean, it seems to be almost a foregone conclusion that you're going to be the candidate. Do you have to sort of rise above the fray here and say, well, they're going to do what they can? You want to discourage it? Do you want to just keep the focus on Jim Himes? Or how do you sort of get through this?
Well, you know, what you said at the last part and what Matt said earlier is true. Is our focus is going to be on offering the voters two very different visions for America. Jim Himes' vision, which is that we should have more government as the solution to our problems, right? Whether it's the economy, whether it's health care, more government, more spending is the answer, versus I have a much more Reagan-esque view of how we should run government. We should have, you know, values of individual liberty, free enterprise, and small government. In terms of my primary opponents, I think they all agree with me. I don't think you see that there's a huge amount of difference between myself and my primary opponents, you know, on a lot of these issues. So, you know, what our focus is going to be is really contrasting our, you know, my candidacy with Jim Himes.
I mean, if you woke up tomorrow and you found that all the a large portion of these signatures weren't valid and you're it, I mean, that you're breathing a big sigh of relief, right? I mean, just from your finances and everything else, that you don't have to go through this primary, or do you sort of like say, hey, this is a healthy process, I welcome a primary, and let's have at it?
It actually is pretty irrelevant, right? For us, we actually are very confident if there is a primary, we're going to win it. You know, it might force us to spend a little more money in July than we otherwise would spend, but we're just going to use that to get better known, right? A lot of folks up here in Ridgefield, they don't know me yet, right? Because I'm the state senator from out in the Shelton area. So if we have to spend money early in a primary, we're going to spend it on making sure that not only Republicans, but unaffiliates and Democrats get to learn about me and who I am.
So you could benefit from a primary. That's one school of thought, that, hey, bring on the primary, you win again, you know, you look like a winner once again, and that just dovetails nicely into the general election. The other one is, hey, look, we're using all our ammunition on each other. Why don't you guys just, you know, cool it? And this is our guy, and you're young, you can run again.
And it all depends on how it's done, right? You look at the Rob Simmons, Linda McMahon, you know, contest.
Yeah, I was going to say that, because you have Linda McMahon and Rob Simmons, who are neck and neck at the convention, and Linda, you know, wins at the convention sort of by a hair. And then you have Peter Schiff, who comes in sort of a distant third. Right. And yet Rob Simmons bows out somewhat gracefully, I guess, and Peter Schiff is hanging in there. What's the best way to do this?
Yeah, and no, to me, you know, what Rob Simmons did was he said, look, Dick Blumenthal is going to be a very tough person to beat in the fall. Yeah. We can't be fighting ourselves. And what that was happening there is Linda and Rob were going very, very negative on each other. Yeah. And that's when a primary becomes destructive, is when you just start flinging mud at each other rather than saying, look, what politics is about is two different visions for what we want our government to be.
I think that's one of the things. Obviously, I was at the debate we had here on the set here a while back, and to be frank, some of the comments between you and Mr. Merkel got a little heated at times. A little bit of the mud was slinging, and I think that's one of the possible problems you might have with a primary. Things might just get a little. The level might go up a little bit. The desperation might go up a little bit on your opponent. You might spend a little more money than what you want to. But on the flip side, it'd be good to have a primary because, like you say, it'll get your name ID up a little higher in areas such as Ridgefield and Wilton, some areas where you're not known. So it does work out both ways.
Like most things in life, there are positives and negatives there, right?
Yeah.
Okay, you want to talk a little bit about the deficit. I saw a graphic on TV that our deficit is now, it's either equal to our gross domestic product, or it's passing it, it's surpassing it. We're spending money hand over fist. The thing that really bothers me is you say you have all these stimulus packages and so forth. It would appear that it's going to political supporters of the president and his party. Some of the unions are coming out looking wonderful. We talked a little bit about earlier this evening about people moving to Washington, D.C., because that's one of the only places in the country that's actually adding jobs. So you see a lot of tax dollars that are being used to kind of as political paybacks for supporters. So all this money is being piled up, all this debt is being piled up, yet we're not seeing any stimulating of the economy. As a matter of fact, some people are a little concerned that we're going to have a double-dip recession here. And any good news on the employment front is from census workers and things like that. What do you think? What are you going to bring to the table that's going to address what to everyone it seems to be the primary issue is the economy? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I think you've laid out kind of both the short-term and the long-term problem. In the short term, we're not creating jobs. In the long term, we have this massive federal deficit that is just going to choke growth in the long run. So what do we do about it? In the short term, what I think we need to do is repeal the unspent stimulus money and replace it with a payroll tax cut. Because what's happened for us here in Fairfield County is all we've gotten from the stimulus package is more debt. $10,000 more in debt for every family in Fairfield County. And everybody should ask themselves, what did I get from that stimulus? The answer is probably nothing. And so what I want to do is we have $500 billion that's unspent. If we replace that with a payroll tax cut it in half for a year, that'll give $1,500 to every middle-class family. It'll actually give every small business a tax cut to go and create jobs or buy new equipment. And it's going to reduce the deficit by $150 billion because it only costs $350 billion as compared to the $500 billion of pork barrel spending that we have right now.
Can I ask Dan a question kind of based on that? He mentions that he's not as well known in Ridgefield. One of the things that I've learned from you from Ridgefield and from Rudy Marconi from being on this show is, despite the fact of its being very well off, very well run, a lot of senior citizens in Ridgefield. And a lot of them say, and you probably hear it on the Board of Finance, I want to be able to stay in Connecticut and I want to be able to stay in Ridgefield. Why are you the best candidate for those seniors who want to be able to stay here in Ridgefield where they've lived for 50, 60 years and such?
Yeah, and when seniors say that, they actually say that because the cost of living here continues to escalate and escalate. And the only way that you're going to stop that is by bringing businesses and jobs back to Connecticut. If you look at it, property taxes continue to go up and up, not just in Ridgefield, but in most communities. Why? Because the communities that keep property taxes low are the ones that bring businesses in. So ideas like the payroll tax cut, which can actually help small businesses flourish, will help businesses come to Ridgefield and hopefully keep taxes low for the residents with the property taxes to enable seniors to be able to afford to live here in the long run. There's a lot of other things that we can do, but a lot of it's on the state level, not on the federal level, to actually fix Connecticut.
Well, speaking of keeping people here in Connecticut and in the Ridgefield area, one of my big pet peeves is transportation. I've talked about it multiple times, especially in southern Fairfield County. You have a serious problem with transportation. If you want to bring jobs to this area, if you make it more attractive to a better transportation, more jobs will come. What are your thoughts on transportation in the 4th District, and what would you do if you were elected congressman to help out alleviate the traffic situation we have in this area.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And there's, two big issues that we have. One is in kind of the 95 corridor and the Merritt Parkway, and the other is up here with Route 84, and obviously the interchanges between them. And there's really two things that we can do, right? And they're common sense things, not a Republican idea or a Democrat idea. One is, it's the theory of choke points. If you actually look where traffic builds up, it always builds up at the same entrances and exits because people are merging on and off. The solution to it is actually what we did down on the Sikorsky Bridge down in Stratford, where when we were reconstructing the bridge, we just added in 600 yards of an entrance and an exit lane on either side. And by doing that, it cost about $1 million to do. By doing that, there's no traffic there anymore. So, what we can't do is we can't say, well, geez, we're going to expand all of 84 by a full lane all along the length. It's cost prohibitive. But if you say, here are the choke points where traffic always builds up, let's just add in 600 yards of an entrance ramp and an exit lane, that will actually alleviate traffic. The second thing we need to do is we need to make public transportation better for inside Connecticut. Metro North right now is a great way to get to New York City, but try going from Bridgeport to Stamford, and it's atrocious. There's not enough parking out in Bridgeport to actually drive your car there, and you get to Stamford, and unless you work right there, there's no way to get from the train station to your office. So ideas like more parking in the eastern part of the district and shuttle services in the western part of the district will get more people off the roads and onto Metro North.
Are you in favor of having tolls on the borders?
I'm not, because I actually don't think, A, they don't raise that much revenue. In New Jersey, for every dollar they take in, it costs them 50 cents to run the toll booths between operating cost and capital cost. And second is, I think we have enough traffic problems already. And even with the new Easy Pass systems that they have, it still does cause more of a backup. So if we need to raise revenue for our roads, there are much better ways to do it than tolls, I think.
The number here is 792-4101, 792-4101. If you have any questions for Dan DiBasella, now's your time. Please feel free to call in. The economy, that seems to be one of the biggest issues, but let me ask you just about the state economy, because things are really not all that rosy in Hartford either. They're running deficits. They're talking about raising taxes and so forth. This is my question for you, because you've been in Hartford, but I know, having talked to John Fry, having talked to Governor Rell, you guys are sort of fighting the good fight, but it's a bit of a losing battle because you're overwhelmed by left-leaning Democrats that just want to spend, and are in the pocket of the state unions. So how do you get past the fact that you've been in state government when deficits have been run up and taxes have been raised, and try to say, yeah, well, they were, but gosh, we really fought the good fight, and don't put that on me. We didn't vote for those budgets. They were passed by the majority. How do you handle that?
I think it's, again, about offering a different vision. And this is one of the things I was proud to work with John Fry and with other legislative Republicans on, is to offer a budget that actually shrank the size of state government by about 8% to close our deficit. The Democrats at the end of the day passed a budget that raised taxes by $1 billion, borrowed over $1 billion to close the deficit, and used a ton of one-time gimmicks like putting off pension payments and things like that. And so because of that, we now have another $8 billion deficit for the next 2 years. At the end of the day, there's only two ways you can close a deficit. You cut spending or you raise taxes. And I think people are going to have a very clear choice this fall when you're voting for governor or for state senator or state rep between, do we want to raise taxes again in Connecticut, or do we need to get this massive bureaucracy under control?
My question, just politically speaking, because I sense a almost Dewey-esque overconfidence in the Republican Party that, boy, November's going to be great. Don't you see all the trends and stuff like that? Just a little inside politics here. You can chime in if you want. How are the Republicans going to mess this up both in Connecticut and nationwide? What are the potential? I have some ideas, but what do you think are some potential pitfalls out there as we look to the November election and how things are going to go?
Yeah, I think the biggest pitfall for the Republican Party is that we become what the media says we are, and we become the party of no. If we don't offer a positive vision for America, if we don't give people a reason to vote for the Republicans, then why should they? Right? It's not good enough to just say the Democrats are screwing up. I mean, they are, but they're doing that all on their own. Our responsibility is to say, what is the alternative that we'll offer if you vote for us? And that's what I want my campaign to be about. Is it's about ideas to help middle-class families.
I'll take that question a little bit of a step further. Let's say, hypothetically, I don't think it's going to be, but it's another 1994. Republicans take both houses of Congress and everything. What should the incoming Congress do?
What's the contract up for America?
Well, no, not the contract with America. So it doesn't look like there's going to be gridlock that shuts the government down and the Republicans just get right back where they started and everything. Republicans take Congress, what do they need to do, even with the Democratic administration, to show the people that they're working?
Yeah, I think, funny, first off, a story is I was talking to a woman in Norwalk who said, I voted for Barack Obama and Jim Himes because I wanted a change. But this isn't the change I wanted. What I actually wanted was I wanted the parties to start working together a little more. She said, I liked it when Bill Clinton was president and the Republicans controlled Congress because we had a great economy, we actually closed the deficit, and
welfare reform.
Welfare reform, NAFTA, because the parties had to work together to get something done. Yeah. That's what I think people want again. And so if we get there, we can do things like put in a federal spending cap to actually force both parties to start to make trade-offs. We can actually pass a payroll tax cut because I'm sure the president feels, as everybody else does, that the economy is still sluggish. And we can do things like, I doubt the president's going to sign a repeal of the health care plan, but we can actually do the things that weren't done in that health care plan to lower costs for the middle class because they completely missed the boat on that, and Jim Himes has admitted that as such. So these are areas where we can work together, Republicans and Democrats, to do something for middle-class families.
Do you sense, I'll get you, but do you sense just in what you're picking up out in the public when you go talk to people, I would say that the election of Scott Brown may have been the zenith of the party in power, a sense that they were shoving health care reform down our throats, that they were raising all these expenditures and so forth, and they weren't listening to the people. I noticed that this year, during the summer recess, there aren't a lot of town halls that are being planned. It's almost as if the government is saying, circle the wagons, we're going to try to ride this thing out, but the people are upset. My question, I'm wondering, is some of that dissipating? Is the economy picking up to the point where people are like, hey, no, it's working out? Or do you still sense, which I think we saw in the primaries this past week, that there still is this smoldering anger out there and anti-incumbency that the Republicans can work with? What's your sense?
No, there is, and I think there are two reasons for that, Marty. One is that even if the economy's not getting worse, it's not getting better, right? Still 10% unemployment out there. In reality, in Fairfield County, it's more like 17% when you include underemployment.
It's just brutal.
Yeah. So people are upset about that, but people, secondly, they're also upset with how the federal government's been behaving in the last 18 months. Mm-hmm. The sense is that whether you agree with or disagree with some of the policies, that they have simply been pushed through without any attempt of bipartisan support, any attempt of doing what Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill did back in the 80s, of coming together and trying to get something done. And people don't want one-party government. They don't want just the Republicans to be in charge, and they don't want just the Democrats to be in charge. They actually want both parties to get something done. So I think because of both the economy and how this administration has handled itself, there's a huge anti-incumbent mood out there.
Okay. Let me throw this one out to you. George Bush came into office. He came into office with a surplus, and he had control of both houses of Congress, Senate, House of Representatives from 2000 to 2006. Massive spending to a scale that was just unbelievable. Mm-hmm. Big contribution to what we have right now. You had 6 years of Republican domination, 2 years of, let's say 4 years of Democrats. What do you say to those independents? It's one thing to say this to the Republicans. They might jump on the bandwagon with that, but some of these independents say, hey, wait a second. You guys had control of everything from 2000 to 2006, 6 years. You're coming back telling us, let's vote you guys back in, but you were part of the problem also. So what do you say to that?
And you know what? We Republicans need to be honest with ourselves that we lost our way. is under George Bush, we became the incumbent party, not the Republican Party. We started spending like incumbents. We were increasing spending 7 or 8% a year. Now, under Barack Obama, it's been much worse. It's increasing spending at 22% a year. But neither of them are sustainable. And you're absolutely right. We were building up way too much debt under President Bush. So what we Republicans need to say is, look, acknowledge the mistake that was made, have new faces come to the table who are actually willing to go up there and cut spending and make some of those hard choices. And that's what we need, the message we need to have credibility again with those independents to say, look, we're going to be the adults in the room who make those hard, unpopular choices to cut spending.
But Al, I think it's a bit of a tortured argument to say, okay, we've run up the deficit. We've done a lot of pork barrel spending. We've heaped debt onto our next 2 generations of children, and we don't know. We're headed towards a Greek type economy, but you guys did it too. Especially when you look at how much has been spent, how it's been expedited.
I think there's a lot of reasons behind spending that's been going on based upon the economy that we have right now, a certain situation that Barack Obama inherited. But I'm not really here to have a debate between you and I, or Mark. I mean, we're here to have a guest here.
All right, but he can chime in whenever he wants. But my point is, with George Bush, he also had 9/11, which after that there was grave concern that the economy was going to go down, so they needed to stimulate it. And he also had to fight 2 wars. Whether you agree with it or not, they did. So there was some spending.
There was some spending in that, but there was also some massive spending also,
it was probably
including a lot of tax cuts that didn't come to fruition.
Neither of the two of you were going to solve those questions tonight.
We're not here for that.
No, you brought the point up. You said the Republicans.
I brought it up to the guest.
Well,
I didn't bring it up to you.
All right, I'm going to point out something else that you touched on at the beginning of the show, Marty. You talked about the anti-incumbency fever out there and such. Are you going to call her? I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
No. You talk about the anti-incumbency fever out there. One of the things that's so amazing to me, too, is you look around these polls and everything, you look around these surveys, and I think Maurice Carroll talked about it when he was on last week with the Q poll. But there's still an overwhelming sense, especially in the congressional districts in this country, that Democrat or Republican, that my congressman is not part of the problem. My congressman gives us good constituent service. I always get a call back from his or her office, that kind of thing.
What are the percentages of incumbents that are reelected generally?
In 2006, when the Democrats took control, there was still a 93% incumbency rate.
Yeah.
The reason that sometimes it shifts is because there's a lot of retirements.
Right.
But one of the questions I want to ask Dan, one of the things that they talked about, I believe it was on Hardball, is that especially with the freshman congressman, you get the, quote, second-term sympathy factor. Especially when somebody like Himes comes in after 20 years of Chris Shays, they say, oh, how can you change 20 years into, let's give him the second term to get it right.
Right.
Why should the congressman not be given that second-term sympathy?
Well, it's because of what he actually has done in the 2 years he's been there. Right? Jim Himes has voted over 95% of the time with Nancy Pelosi. And the times he's voted against her are on things like motions to adjourn or other procedural things. So he's just kind of been lockstep with this Democratic agenda of expanding government. So my argument to people is, if you like where Washington's going, if you like Nancy Pelosi, Jim Himes is your man, because he actually has been lockstep. If you think there's a better way, based on the values of small government, free enterprise, and individual liberty, then it's time for a new congressman. And so that's the choice that people are going to have. If people just say, let's give him another term, they're essentially saying, we like what Nancy Pelosi's doing, let's send somebody back to Washington who's going to support that.
Hasn't Nancy Pelosi actually come into the district on a couple times for different fundraisers and things like that? So this label of being in Nancy Pelosi's hip pocket is pretty accurate, wouldn't you say?
It is, and it's not something Jim shies away from. I mean, I will give Jim Himes credit. He is a true believer. He honestly does believe that government is the answer to our problems, and he's not shy about saying it. And so, that's why this election is going to be what democracy is supposed to be about. Jim Himes is a good man. I'm not going to attack him personally. He's a great family. We just have two very different ideas of what this government should look like at the end of the day. And that's going to be great for the voters.
Let's talk about something that's on TV a lot right now. We see it every day. It's been going on for 52 days, and my man right here, he's talking about drill, baby, drill forever, and now he's been real quiet about it since this came up.
Hey, hold on. You drove over here in a car. Last time I saw you didn't ride a horse over here. You drove a car.
I ride a bike a lot, though.
Oh, that's a good thing.
Small carbon units. The oil spill.
Yes.
Got a big disaster that's out there. Now, my understanding was during the 2008 election cycle, drill baby drill is talked a lot. Let's take the government's hands off these oil companies so they can drill more. In hindsight, right now, looking at what we're seeing right now, and better yet, the way BP is handling this situation, which is not very well, do you think the government should be more involved in terms of making sure safety is primary as opposed to drilling? Or better yet, where do you draw the line in regulation? Did your views change?
There's two things. There's kind of how we're handling the immediate crisis, and then how do we make sure this happens again. And with the immediate crisis, I think there's no doubt everybody's screwed up. BP has screwed up. The government has screwed up. This should have been handled very differently. Now, of course, hindsight's 20/20.
Right.
But if I were, in charge, what I would have said right when this happened, if I were Barack Obama, I would have said, look, everything under the surface is BP's responsibility. You guys go figure out right now how to clog this drill. Clog this hole. What the government's going to take control of is the surface. And what we want from BP is $1 billion in an escrow account, because BP, you're going to pay for this, not the taxpayers. And we're going to use the Navy and the Army Corps of Engineers to make sure that none of this oil hits the shore, and put up all of the barriers that they're talking about that we've seen sitting in Louisiana. So there actually is a case in these kind of disasters for government action. And I think President Bush was rightfully criticized for a slow response to Katrina. I think we have to be critical of the government now, along with BP, for a very slow response to this. Now, how do we deal with it in the future? I think we absolutely need to have regulation, right? We have to have regulation, safety and environmental regulation, if we are going to drill. Because I don't think it's realistic for us to say we're never going to drill for oil again in this country. We have to. The alternative energy isn't there yet that we can rely on. So if we're going to do this, we do need the government to come in and set the proper safety standards so disasters like this don't happen.
I think one of the things that concerned me, and concerned me back when the drill baby drill mantra was going to say, look, the environmental impact this can have. And now we're seeing it right now, because this oil spill can technically, by the end of the summer, cruise right up the East Coast and over towards England, if the currents go properly. There needs to be more appreciation of being safe as opposed to drilling further and further down these surfaces, because now we're down to like 10,000 feet and we're going further and further down. But as we see right now, we got this big hole and they can't even stop it. And it's a huge problem for the entire panhandle, which will be affected pretty soon. The oil's hitting this area, your fishing industry is shot, and nothing can be done to address their hardships in terms of losing jobs. And what are you going to do about that? And I understand that the federal government should get involved in some way, but in terms of the federal government, the military getting involved, would you be concerned that it's going to put a huge cost upon the taxpayers based upon something that was a company's fault?
And that's why I would require BP to put that $1 billion in escrow and have them pay for the naval operation. The taxpayer should not be responsible for this. BP should. But I think that, this is always, with these types of debates, you don't want to go to either extreme, right? You don't want to say, geez, we're never going to drill again, right, because of this, because we need to. And on the other side, you don't want to say, hey, let's just go drill like crazy and not worry about the environment. The answer is there's a balance there that you have to have between our energy needs and protecting the environment. Obviously, this was screwed up. I don't think anybody's going to argue otherwise. But going forward, we have to learn from this so we know how we can drill safely. And I'm not an engineer, so I don't have specifics on it. But that's what we need. People much smarter than I to figure out. How do we actually drill in an environmentally safe way?
To be honest with you, I have to. I've had mea culpas in the past on different items. I'd like to think we're open-minded and here, but I am stunned by the devastation that this. The thing that I quoted over and over again when we're talking back in my drill baby drill phase. My thinking has evolved. No, I still think we need to drill, but the statistic I quoted was that during Katrina, a hurricane swept right through the same area, right through all those same oil rigs. Not one drop of oil was lost. And then somehow, there was some sort of explosion, and it caused this thing to burst. And now there's this gaping wound that's just hemorrhaging oil, and they can't stop it. I mean, it's the most frustrating thing. But to your point, where we can't just not drill for oil, I found it just heart-wrenching but compelling testimony. The widow, I think there were 11 workers that died. The widows testified before Congress and said, it would be an additional tragedy if you somehow closed down this industry. And this is a woman who just recently lost her husband on one of these rigs. So, I mean, it is such a vexing problem, and I don't want to turn on my TV and see that black stuff billowing out. I don't see it tempering at all. But I don't know. It's very frustrating.
Well, the add on to what you're saying, we had a similar situation where there was a proposal to do a natural gas line in Long Island Sound that Chris Shades was when he was a congressman, was spearheading the stop. And the reason why I bring up this oil disaster in the Gulf, because what happened in the Gulf could potentially, if that gas line was ever there, God forbid there was a disaster, there's something that hopeful Congress and DeBus would have to take care of or deal with. It'll be under his watch to watch this proposal go through and make sure that the area is safe.
I don't know. Maybe I'm just not aware. Maybe if there were oil rig problems like this, it happened in the North Sea somewhere and wasn't highly televised. I mean, we had the Exxon Valdez where you had essentially a drunk captain that ran the ship aground, and okay, we can all understand that. Stuff happens. I can't recall something like we're seeing in the Gulf of Mexico that's happened before. Is this a one-time thing, or?
Hopefully. I mean, this is unprecedented, the scope of the ecological disaster here. I mean, the Exxon Valdez was bad, but already there's been a multiple of oil released in the Gulf relative to, I mean, you remember, it was one tanker, a lot of oil. Yeah. This, as you said, this is just coming out of the pipe, and it's coming out at a rate of, I think it was the Exxon Valdez was passed on like day 21, and we're at like day 52 now. Yeah. So this is unprecedented, and hopefully we will learn enough from this that this doesn't happen again.
Yeah. All right, you have some interesting statistics, and by the way, you had some footage of the Unity Day parade from 10 years ago. We're going to save that for another show.
We'll save it for next week, and actually, because June 12th will be the 5th year anniversary of the Danbury Unity March. But since we're having such a good time here, we'll just keep this thing going.
Okay.
Because
you have some statistics, some Quinnipiac polling numbers that you wanted to talk about.
Well, it doesn't have much to do with the congressional race here, but basically, to make a long story short, everything's relatively the same right now. You have the Republican gubernatorial candidates still relatively at the same level with a huge undecided pool. Same thing with the Democrats. Linda McMahon and Richard Blumenthal are relatively at the same level. But my question to you is that, what are your thoughts on I know you're not running for state office anymore,
right,
but you got the gubernatorial race where there's a huge pool of undecided voters here. What are your thoughts on these races?
Yeah, I think that's right, because most people don't know the four major candidates right now. Right? The four major candidates are on the Republican side, Tom Foley and Mike Fedeli, and on the Democratic side, Dan Malloy and Ned Lamont. Ned Lamont's probably the best known since he ran against Joe Lieberman in 2006. So many people are undecided because they don't know yet what each of these guys stand for. They have not been out there, with the exception of Tom Foley. None of them have really been on TV. And I think what the gubernatorial race is going to come down to is, we talked before about the financial crisis facing Connecticut. How do you want to fix it? I think Tom Foley or Mike Fedeli will approach it in a much tougher way than Governor Rell has, in terms of being willing to lay off state workers, and they're willing to restructure state government. And I think Dan Malloy and Ned Lamont are going to approach it much more saying, yeah, maybe we'll do some spending cuts, but we also need to raise taxes. And so I think that's going to be the choice between voters between these. Now in the primaries, I think both primaries can go either way. I don't think there's a clear front runner, because there are so many undecided voters.
But let's not leave out Oz-Griebel, though, too.
That's true.
Come on, I know he's low in the polls right now, but let's not leave out Oz.
But really, I mean, I think the Tom Foley, Mike Fedeli primary is setting up to be the independent businessman outsider who's going to bring free market ideas to government and probably cut. And then Mike Fedeli, who has that a little bit of, hey, you were there when all these budgets weren't passing and stuff like that. Why should we, kind of have the same guy who's been there? Seems to be, you got the outsider versus insider.
There was an interesting development in the gubernatorial race this morning concerning actually three big chief executives in Connecticut. How Bill Finch, the mayor of Bridgeport, which is in the 4th district, Eddie Perez, the mayor of Hartford, who's on trial right now, and John DeStefano, who ran for governor in the last election, all three of them, instead of endorsing their mayoral colleague, Dan Malloy, went and endorsed Ned Lamont today, despite the fact of the convention going the way it did, and Mr. Malloy being a fellow mayor. They all endorsed the outsider as opposed to one of their own to take the governor's mansion.
Well, let me speak about something real quick. You talk about endorsements. What are your thoughts on Governor Rell not endorsing Mike Fedeli?
You know, I actually was rather surprised at it. You know, Governor Rell has, unfortunately, in the last 12 months, kind of since she let that budget pass, has taken much more of a hands-off approach to both government and politics. And I would have thought that, you know, Mike Fedeli has been a very good lieutenant governor. I've served with him as lieutenant governor. He's president of the state senate. He's a very good man, would be a very capable governor.
Did you vote in favor of Mike Fedeli?
I did.
Tom,
I voted in favor of Mike Fedeli, although I think Tom Foley would also make an excellent governor. But at the end of the day, you have to choose one at these conventions. But I was shocked that the governor didn't endorse him, and I wish she would. Or if it's not going to be him, she should endorse somebody else, because she has been governor and not only the leader of our state, but the leader of our party for the last 6 years. And I do think she has a responsibility to step up and say, you know, here's what I think is a worthy successor to me.
It's interesting that you talked about.
I've got a branch off of that, actually. And I know you've obviously known Mike for a long time and such. And one thing that I'm curious, I did this to Senator Caligiuri, so it's okay. Three big leaders in the state senate, all of whom you're very close with, Senators Guglielmo and the leadership of the state senate Republicans, Senator Rohrabaugh and Senator McKinney, all are put their weight behind Oz Griebel. And it shocked me.
What the heck is going on?
It shocked me that I said the Senate leadership of the Republicans ought to be supporting their lieutenant governor. They work with them better than anybody. What does that say?
You know, I can't speak on behalf of my colleagues. I could say Oz Griebel is a smart businessman, right? He's impressive, right? If you watch him, he is a former CEO. He is well-spoken, articulate, you know, can really talk about in great detail where we need to actually reinvent government. So he's a very, very credible candidate. So, you know, I can't blame any of my colleagues for going with him. I don't think it was anything against Mike Fedeli, more so than they actually liked Oz Griebel.
Yeah,
I'll be real quick, because you're currently now still a state senator.
That's right.
And you got some unfinished business to do down there in the Senate. I think there's going to be a scheduled veto session on June 21st.
That's correct.
One of the things that came up that really got under the belly of a lot of Democrats, and I think a lot of people in general, because it was passed with an overwhelming margin, was Governor Rell's veto of the bill that would create a commission to overview the criminal sentencing policies. I think it passed 34-1 in the Senate. I think it passed probably unanimously in the House. What are your thoughts on Governor Rell's veto, and would you support overriding the veto?
Well, and this is something, because I haven't talked, the veto just came down, I think it was either yesterday or the day before, and I have not talked to her or her office about their logic about it yet. I mean, I voted for the bill, and, you know, because it was something that, geez, we should, you know, have a review of our sentencing guidelines. Are they too lenient? Are they too strict? In reading her veto message, it sounded like it was a cost issue.
Right.
That it said, she said it was going to cost, I think it was $135,000.
Yeah. And it's being, in her opinion, this is already being done by the Judiciary Committee.
Yes, and that would be my question. In reviewing, if making my decision to actually maintain the veto or not, I want to make sure that this is getting done. If it's already being done by somebody else and we don't need to spend the $130,000, well, great, we need to spend less money. But that's kind of, I need to dig into that a little deeper before saying whether I'm going to support the override or not.
Okay, caller, you're on the air?
We're here.
Yes, go right ahead. You're on the air for Dan
Dan. A couple questions for all you gentlemen.
Yes.
Two things. With the offshore drilling rig, there's been rumors going around on talk radio and on Community 23 channel that there was skepticism about a Korean submarine had something to do with this. It's just a rumor, I think, but more and more talk shows and radio shows are talking about this.
You know, my advice to you is you guys stop watching Kevin Gallagher's shows.
Congress, okay, and the health care. Even with the Congressional Budget Office saying that the figures are blown way out of proportion, where it's much more than what the president's saying, how is, with the federal spending, any states going to try to get their states in order the way the federal government's out of control.
Well, if they don't have the special deal like Nebraska and Louisiana, where they were paid off with our tax dollars to vote for this boondoggle, I think that's a good question.
Well,
thanks a lot. How about that? Did the Koreans take out the oil rig?
I think he's mixing up two stories. There was a Korean submarine that was shot down between North Korea and South Korea. Yeah. That's a different story. That had nothing to do with the Gulf.
Yeah, but
that's two different things.
That short little guy that runs,
different ocean.
I would not put it past that guy. Didn't they take out? They just took out a South Korean ship, and he's all upset. He's going to, he's going to melt Seoul because he dared it. All right, so you don't put a lot of stock in that.
Don't put a lot of stock in that.
And do you think the Congressional Budget Office, if they said the health care bill is going to cost X, are you at all surprised that as they look at it, it's somewhat north of X?
Yeah, not at all. I mean,
seems to be the standard operating procedure for the government.
Well, and this was the big lie of the health care debate, right? Is the health care law that we passed is going to cover 6% of the population that's uninsured, but it's going to do so by raising costs and taxes for the other 94% of us. Mm-hmm. The big lie was we're going to cover more people and it's going to cost less money. Yeah. That just doesn't make any sense. The debate we should have had was, are we willing to pay more to cover the uninsured, or is there a better way? And the better way that I think we should do is to lower costs for everybody. Ideas like tort reform, incentives for preventative medicine, interstate competition between health care companies. There's a list of about 20 different ideas that can actually lower costs by 10 to 20%. If you do that, that helps all the middle class, and you free up money to cover more of the uninsured. That's why I think this health care bill missed the boat and is going to cost a lot more than people thought.
Sorry, go ahead.
One quick small thing on the state Senate level.
Yeah, go back to state Senate.
Senate Bill 493, the energy bill.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on that? Why do you object to it? And obviously, I'm assuming you won't be in favor of overriding the veto. What are your thoughts on the energy bill, and why do you feel it's not the right thing?
Well, because this energy bill, it was one of those bills that has everything but the kitchen sink in it, and it actually has some really good parts to it, especially incentives for alternative energy, solar power. I wish they would strip those out into a separate bill, and we could just unanimously pass that. The problem with the main part of the bill is that it moves us back towards re-regulation in our energy industry. And the problem that we've had is that we have partially deregulated energy in this state, so that the companies like UI and CL&P have a lot more flexibility in setting rates, but consumers don't have a lot more choices. They still, 97% of us are buying CL&P and UI. What this bill does is it further moves us back towards re-regulation, which is really a giveaway to UI and CL&P, not helping consumers lower their rates at all. So that's my problem with the bill. I think we need to move further towards deregulation, not regulation.
Okay. Matt, we're in the lightning round. A quick one.
Okay, I know you're going to be debating Congressman Himes at some point throughout the fall and throughout the summer and such. And I know you're going to be in all of the different towns. What are you going to be doing to show them the differences between the two of you in the coming months? I think you're going to be very visible in the communities, aren't you?
No, that's absolutely
20 seconds to make the contrast.
20 seconds. The contrast is, if you think Washington's heading in the right direction and you like Nancy Pelosi, vote for Jim Himes. If you think there's a better way based in small government, free enterprise, individual liberty, vote for Dan DiVasella. That's
our guest this evening has been Dan DiVasella. Thank you very much for coming in. We'd love to have you come in again. We'd love to do a debate. Are you open to something
Absolutely.
like that?
Anytime you guys are ready.
We'll bring them on. So thanks for watching. Join us again next week on Ideas of Work and Beyond, right here, 9 to 10, and some other times. I'm just pulling out the contract now. I'm saying whenever you can put us on, we'll be on.
Watch us on YouTube.
Watch us on YouTube. That's it'll be great. So we'll see you next week. Thanks for joining us.